You are listening to UpTalk with Sean Conohan. The gloves are off, and it's time to have a chat.
Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of UpTalk. I'm your host, Sean Conohan. Really excited to get this thing started. It's been a long journey to get to here, and I want to thank everyone for their support. Lots of positive comments from the first responder community, as well as from people who aren't involved with first response. I want to especially thank the people that supported my Kickstarter campaign to get some costs taken care of to get this thing up and going. A small handful of people within that Kickstarter campaign, I want to point out, these people donated $100 or more to the campaign, which is overwhelming to me and, very generous on their part, especially during the Christmas season. It's really hard to ask people to donate for anything. So I'd like to thank Conrad Snow, Jordan King, John Stalker, Gabriella Kunz-Gundhart, Curtis McClellan, Don Parsons, and Chris Willman. Thank you very, very much, guys. And thank you to the other 60-odd people who donated everything from $5 to, like I said, up over $100. It was a huge success. Came right down to the wire. I was pretty nervous, but ended up pulling it out with your guys' help. So thank you very much. I would also like to thank a few people, actually just point them out specifically. Chris Ward, who I'm going to, from now on, call the Computer Whisperer. He messaged me and asked if he could help. And he basically helped set me up with all the hardware and software that I need to get this thing started and recorded properly. And I'll be consulting him on an ongoing basis. Any technology/computer needs that I have, he'll be able to help me out with. So that's a huge benefit for the podcast. So I want to thank him very much. I want to thank Kevin Davison, my friend of 28 years now, for allowing me to use part of his awesome song "When Those Sirens Are Gone" for the podcast, which you'll hear at the end of the episode. I want to thank him very much. That was very nice of him to do. Also, as you just heard, I want to thank Bruce Buffer from the Ultimate Fighting Championship, the longtime cage announcer for the UFC, for being really nice and recording the intro for the podcast, as well as some other stuff, which you'll hear later. So, big thank to Bruce Buffer, and like I said, Chris and Kevin, thank you very much. Before I get into the podcast itself, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. So, probably the most boring part of any podcast episode you're going to listen to will be this part coming up, just listening to me. So, when I was 18-ish, I got involved with the volunteer fire service in New Minas, in the Annapolis Valley, with my friend Kevin. And from there, got very interested in the fire service and first response in general. After 2 years of taking a recreation management degree at Acadia University, I decided that I wanted to become a paramedic. And so I left Acadia, went to Holland College in Charlottetown, and got my certificate for emergency medical technician, which is now primary care paramedic, and worked as a primary care paramedic and communications officer in Nova Scotia for 17 years. Throughout my time working there, I held many leadership positions. I was an operations supervisor, a senior communications officer. I was also union president for a long stretch. So I have lots of knowledge from both sides of the table and how the business works. And everything was going great. I was good at my job. I thought that I had won the lottery and was going to do this job until I retired, and everything was going to be great. Until September of 2013, when I took a call at the communications center. It was a suicide of a young person, and I had taken many of those calls throughout my career. But for some reason, this one was different. And after the call, I hung up the phone and immediately broke down and started crying, which I've never done before. I had to leave the floor and actually didn't come back to that shift. I had to go home And even though I was told that I had to go in my next shift, I refused because I was not ready. But did have to go in the day after that. So I got a day and a half to get over it, which wasn't enough looking back. And I tried to get back on my feet and thought that I had done so. But in the few months that followed, my work life and my private life got progressively chaotic and stressful, and my moods were all over the place, and found it more difficult to complete what were easy tasks for me before. And in March 17th of 2014, after telling my employer that I was having problems and asking for help, I was fired, and all my benefits were stopped at that second. Looking back on that now, it was devastating, and which is why my therapy for PTSD has been delayed for a year and a half, and is finally underway now. And I'm now getting that help with the help from Temacontra Memorial Trust, who has, through their funding program, has funded part of my therapy for PTSD. So big thanks for them, and I'm starting on this journey. However, I am in a good place now with a new career, and I wanted to start helping others who may have been through what I went through, and also to try to stop other people from getting as far as I got. Try to get them to educate themselves and to do some preventative maintenance, which I believe we all suck at as first responders for the most part. There are a few people in my career who I had contact with who I think do it really well and really have that separation from work life and home life and take good care of themselves physically and emotionally and mentally, but I think that's rare. We tend to focus on helping other people and tend to not help ourselves until it's too late. So that's what's brought me to here, and I wanted to do, I think a podcast in this day and age is a great way to get information out to people, and I love talking to people and learning new things. So it was natural that I wanted to do a podcast, and that's what this podcast is. It's going to be an ongoing conversation about mental health in general, but specifically and focused on post-traumatic stress disorder as it affects first responders. Any of you that know me and have gotten into big conversations with me know that from time to time I'll get off topic and we'll venture off into a side conversation, but we'll always try to bring it back to the center and to the focus of PTSD and first responders. My vision for this podcast is a conversation. I picture all of us, even the listeners, sitting around a big table, maybe a drink or two in our hands, and just having a conversation, a big chat, and telling stories and providing support to one another. That's what I see in my head when I see this podcast. It will be monthly for now, on the 17th of every month, to commemorate my last day working as a paramedic on March 17th. In the future, maybe we'll get it more frequent, but for now it'll be every month. A big thing with this podcast is engagement from the listeners. This is what I want. I want you to get a hold of me. I want you to email me at uptalkpodcast@gmail.com. Fire me off an email. Message me on Facebook. If you're not on the page already, just search UpTalk Podcast on Facebook and you'll see the page there. Or you can get me on Twitter at UpTalk Podcast. I want you to contact me. I want you to tell me what you want to hear. What topics do you want to learn about? Especially when it comes to Dr. Robin McGee and her Clinically Speaking with Dr. McGee segment. What do you want her to talk about? What is it you would like her to teach us about? Because I'm learning in this process as well. Really want the topics in the future to be driven by the listeners and what is interesting to you guys. I'm really excited to see what you guys come up with. So please get a hold of me. As well as topics, tell me what's working, tell me what's not working, other things you'd like to see, guests you'd like me to go out and try to get. Anything. Just get a hold of me, and I'll be sure to get back to you as soon as I can. Also, if you or you know of a group that you think would benefit from me coming in and speaking about PTSD or in my story and educating a little bit about PTSD, please get a hold of me. That's the other part of this, an offshoot of this podcast that I like to get involved with, is going out and speaking to groups and speaking to people and continuing that conversation face to face. I'd like to ask for your patience during this podcast, as I'm learning how to edit sound and how to put all these segments together. Just bear with me. I can tell you that in this episode, during the clinically speaking segment with Dr. McGee, for the first 12 minutes, there's a somewhat significant hum. It won't stop you from hearing what's going on, but it's there. And about 12 minutes in, I made some adjustments, and it's less for the rest of the talk with her. And that's something that will get improved on more and more as we go, as I learn how to handle this technology better and better. So bear with me and be patient, and I appreciate it. And I'm very excited to say that it is finally time to have a chat.
And now, it's time for Clinically Speaking with Dr. McGee.
Okay, finally get to introduce everybody to Dr. Robin McGee. Robin, how are you today?
I'm great, thanks.
Well, thank you. I just want to, first of all, I need to thank you very much for agreeing to do this. And right away when I brought the idea to you, you were all over it, you jumped on board and didn't waver. And I'm very excited about that. I think people are going to be really interested to hear what you have to say and some of the conversations that we have. And, you bring, this was crucial for me for this podcast, because I think you bring a certain, a clinical integrity to the podcast. Otherwise, it would just be me blabbering on forever, and people will get tired of that pretty quick. But I think, this is great. I'm just really excited about it. And, like I said, you jumped right on board, and why was that? Why were you so good to do it?
Well, because I'm really, really keen to make sure that people out there can know that PTSD is a treatable condition, and that people can get past it, can overcome it completely. And so I just think there's a lot of myths out there about PTSD, and I just really relish the chance to address those.
I totally agree. I'm of the same mindset as you are, and I think we can start hammering away at these issues. I think first and foremost, people had to listen there earlier to me talk about myself and my history, which was probably pretty boring. But I think people will be really interested to hear about you and how you got started in this and your background.
Well, my background, I'm actually a child psychologist. I'm a child clinical psychologist and a PhD in psychology from University of Western Ontario. That was many, many, many years ago, 30 years ago now. Anyway, came to the Annapolis Valley in around 1995, around in there, and then have been, I worked at Valley Hospital in their patient mental health clinic for about 12 years, and then since then switched over to working for the Annapolis Valley Regional School Board full-time. However, throughout that whole time, both working in public practice, both in health and in education, I also maintain a very small private practice. It's very small because of working full time. Anyway, it's only about 3 patients a week. So and in the course of that, have had the opportunity to treat a lot of vets, a lot of first responders, a lot of child sexual abuse survivors, many people who have post-traumatic stress disorders, and so consequently have really gotten that becomes the majority of the practice really quickly, because there's so many people out there who've been through a lot. And so I made an effort to get specialized training in that domain, and I can talk about that a little bit later. But anyway, that's my interest.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, and you touched on it a little bit, and we'll get into it probably in just a few minutes. I think, for the most part, I mean, I have an idea of what I think PTSD is, and how, in a way that I sort of explain it to people that may ask me. But I'm interested from a clinical standpoint, just if you could let all of us know, like, what is post-traumatic stress disorder?
Well, it's a mental health condition that has to have a number of criteria to be diagnosed. And just to make it clear that there's such a thing as post-traumatic stress.
Right.
Post-traumatic stress is something we've all been through. If, say, you came to a near miss in a car accident, you might be shaky and you might be flustered. That's something that a lot of people can relate to. It's possible to be stressed by something. Post-traumatic stress disorder is taking that to another level. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about what the disorder is. The idea is when you talk about criteria, there's one of the criteria is you have to have experienced a stressor. So you have to have been exposed to death, or the actual or threatened death, or actual or threatened sexual violence. Those three possible kinds of threats. And that can either happen to you directly in the sense that those things happen to you. Second thing is that you could witness those things. Another thing is that you could hear about them happening to a relative or a close friend and be stressed by that. And sometimes repeated and extreme indirect exposure to these kinds of things can result in would be considered a stressor, a traumatic stress.
Okay, right on.
So that's one. So it's quite broad. They broadened it in about May of 2013. They changed their criteria to include traumas experienced vicariously, so that you could sort of, if you learn about them. Or a good example of where I see vicarious trauma all the time is in people who are the superiors of operational members who are frontline responders. So they're constantly hearing about burned bodies and dead babies and things like that over and over all day, and that's very hard on them. So anyway, next thing is criteria is the idea of an intrusion. So what I mean by intrusion is intrusive thought or memory, nightmares, flashbacks, increased distress, a real reactivity to triggers. The idea is that the experience intrudes on the person's mind. Right,
so like it has like an impact on your normal or everyday life, like.
Well, yeah, but it's specifically it comes back in the form of the memory of it is troubling. Okay. Very troubling. It's the kind of memory, like a lot of us can have of something upsetting in our background where we think, I broke up with that guy in grade 7, that was really sad. Yeah. But it's a memory, it's a story to us now. When we tell it, we were sad at the time, we were 12 or whatever, but we aren't shuddering. When the difference between a post-traumatic memory and that kind of personal memory is you do shudder. There is an inward shudder, cringe. At remembering it physically is in you still. It's something else. It's another kind of memory versus just that bad thing happened to me. So you can talk about that later about the two kinds of memory, narrative memory and post-traumatic memory.
Okay, excellent. All right.
So another thing that is a criterion for PTSD is the idea of avoidance. So that the person is persistently avoidant of something that either triggers the stimuli, the memory, or will be very avoidant of their own feelings. They'll be very numb. Then I've had clients who are avoidant of places, certain places. For example, where Swiss Air took place, people who were involved in that can't have anything to do with that. Can't even go to the South Shore.
Absolutely.
So that kind of avoidance.
Right.
So the other piece is fourth criteria has to do with alterations in your thought and your mood after the traumatic event. So you might have trouble remembering parts of it, or maybe there's negative beliefs. By that we mean like I'm to blame, or I'm responsible, or I didn't do enough, or that kind of thought. Distorted sense of blame of yourself or of other people. And just extreme emotions, fear, shame, terror, those kinds of feelings that come to mind. Sometimes people lose interest in things they used to really love. They just, the heart goes out of them. A lot of people talk about having trouble trusting other people, or just a real constriction in their ability to feel things, even for their family. So that's another criterion. And another part is what they call alterations in arousal, meaning someone could be really, really hypervigilant. With the example that often you hear, the Vietnam vet, the car backfires in the street and the guy's underneath the table. It's troubles with, I'm just on the alert all the time. I'm really irritable all the time. I have terrible sleep problems, terrible concentration problems. All of those are things that are aspects of PTSD. Now, for it to be PTSD, it can't be caused by some other bigger. These things can't be caused by something else, some other bigger disability or disorder that's going on. Schizophrenia or something like that. It can't be caused by something else.
Do you find that happens a lot? Is there a lot of crossover or gray area?
Not really. No.
No.
No. I don't.
That's why you're
Maybe
here,
other clinicians
because
do.
I'm a dummy.
Yeah.
So.
No, I don't see.
No,
I don't see that. I think it's usually when PTSD is in front of you. Usually, it's pretty clear, and it's clear to the person who's suffering it too, because they know that they were okay before, and then these things happen, and now they're not okay.
So did you find, though, is there a prevalence of patients that may have PTSD that may also be susceptible? Do you find they have depression in their history, or they may have a family history of depression that made them more susceptible to,
Well, there's yes and no to that. As with all things, some of our genetics have a role in how vulnerable we are to all kinds of things. So if you have a huge family history of depression and whatnot in the family, that, sure, having a traumatic event can be harder to deal with when you've already you're already down one at bat. That can be a trouble.
Right.
Another thing, though, I want to say is that when we're talking about first responders here, first responders have other problems besides PTSD. They're known to have more trouble with depression and fatigue and marital problems.
Right.
The suicide rate is higher. So they often are. What I mean to say when I say that is that some people have tougher lives than other people in terms of what they see and what they deal with day in, day out. And that would make the strongest stomach turn. Some things that people go through are absolutely overwhelming, and that it's not a question of, I had the wrong family background. It was going to overwhelm you anyway, because you're a human being. That's kind of what I want to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, and you get the mixture of what you experience versus your innate ability to cope, which can be different than the person beside you.
Exactly.
Then, because something may bother me but may not bother you. Or, someone may be able to have a 25-year career as a first responder right beside somebody who maybe can only last a couple years, maybe a few years.
That's right. That's right.
Which makes this really, really hard to nail down a little bit.
Yeah, and then some experiences that people have are overwhelming. If we take an example like Swiss Air, where people were picking up body parts and such like that.
Right.
These are people whose anybody's resources would be blown out of the water by something like that. Anybody would be overcome completely by something on that scale.
Yeah,
so
I had a good friend who was involved with that, and she actually lived in the area when it happened. So she got up, and she was a paramedic, and she got right up and got into a fishing boat, and was one of the first people on the water. And to date, I believe, she's not able to watch the TV movie about it. I haven't been able to get to the first 5 minutes of it. Mm-hmm. Not able to go down to the area at all. It just, it affected her that much.
Yeah, so, some traumas are like oncoming freight trains, and that no one's going to, no one, not even the strongest person, is going to emerge unscathed from certain experiences if they're horrific enough. And and others, other of us that we've had, some of us have been, we've been primed in some sense for harm. Say, if people who've had childhood abuse early in life, physical, sexual, emotional, those kinds of abuse are often more vulnerable. They're more vulnerable to the pain of trauma because issues of trust, etc., and are evoked sometimes by that. So in the case of first responders, if the management is terrible and management is not responsive to people and appear to be sort of betraying or setting in some sense the first responder on the front line, and that front liner was desperately let down by parents throughout his life or her life, it's natural that they would find that kind of betrayal more impactful. So, as with all clinical work, we try to look at the whole person, their whole history, and understand why certain things would be as painful as they are.
Robin, you mentioned, about first responders, and they deal with, there's a lot of other things that they may deal with or have to come up against, and which led into my question. Do you feel, it seems like you may feel like the first response community, are they more susceptible to PTSD than other pockets of society?
They are.
And what do you think that is?
Just a bit of background. First, I'll enlarge on that. In 2014, there were 27 first responders died of suicide in 2014. So in just in 1 year, that's way higher than other professions. So if you think about the Canadian males in the general population, the rate of post-traumatic stress disorder is 1.2%. So about 1% of the population, 1 in 100, or people in the ordinary community are going to have PTSD because of the things that ordinary people encounter, car accidents, and fires, and things like that. In contrast, among Canadian firefighters, the rate was 17%, so a great deal higher. So that's
significant.
And that some rates, estimates of post-traumatic stress disorder in American first responders and ambulance attendants, there are people who work in first aid medicine, that those people have a rate estimated in around 30%.
Whoa.
So that's a lot. So about a third of people in paramedicine are going to have a struggle with PTSD, and people, when I include that in paramedicine, firefighters, RCMP, those people who respond to critical incidents right there at the coalface, those folks are at higher risk for post-traumatic stress. So it's something, and now it's just now that it's increasingly coming to the awareness of government and military and first responder organizations that this is the truth, and that their members require more attention, more monitoring, more prevention, and more individualized therapy as a result.
That's one thing I wanted to ask you about. Have you seen an increase of? I mean, obviously there's an increase of I think people coming forward and talking about it. But do you think that in general there's an increase of people being open to going to get help? And have you seen an increase in your patient load?
What I've seen and what I want to see more of is a more permission giving among members, first responders themselves.
Right.
So when I first started practicing, people would come in and say, I don't want anybody to know that I had a lot of trouble with that child's death when I went to that house. I'm hiding it. I don't want anyone to know. If management finds out, I'll lose my job. Like, they would be very anxious.
Right.
And not only that about losing the job, but wanting to appear manly or stoical, or I'm so tough. And when I say manly, I'm including women in this too.
Absolutely. Well, we don't want any dents in our armor. We want people to see us.
Yes, exactly. So these women, some men and women would say, I am tough as nails, and that's how I want to present. But it really, really hurt me when I saw those little dead children.
Right.
And it really upset me because my kids were that age, and et cetera, et cetera. There are many, many things that act as provocation, why people are vulnerable at certain times of their lives. So anyway, I've seen that, and what I've sort of started seeing now that people are getting successfully treated, what I'm seeing now is responders will go back to their community and they'll say, I went for therapy and it was the greatest thing ever, and now I'm all better, and you should do it too. More and more, there's permission around, oh yeah, I've got PTSD, I think I should go for help. Like, it's okay to acknowledge PTSD now. I see that, and the part of what I see, and that's why I'm really, really keen on this podcast, is that the more the first responder community gives permission to each other, you don't have to be a hard ass all the time. You can go for therapy. I respect you for that.
Yeah.
When you go for therapy, you become safer. You're a safer partner. You're a safer coworker. You're a safer colleague. You're a safer driver. You're all that. People want to work with other people who are sensible and safe, and they don't want their colleagues to be troubled by these things. So, and they don't want to be troubled themselves with these things. So, anyway, all that's to say, I've seen a greater openness to the topic, and the more open it is, and the more we have a chat, as you say, the more we have a chat, the more people get better.
I mean, it was so interesting. Just last week, I think it was, I was at the fire department, and we were all just standing around like we normally do and chat about stupid stuff. So, but then all of a sudden, we're all standing there, and we're talking about PTSD, and we're talking about therapy and getting therapy, and people are talking openly about it. And I just became aware of it all of a sudden. I just sort of stood back and went, this is so cool. Like, this is excellent.
Would that have been a conversation you had 10 years ago?
No, everybody would be terrified to have that. Instead we would go home and you'd drink a 2-4, or you know what I mean, or you would smoke your face off. You would, like, you would not talk about it. You wouldn't. But now I have people coming up to me and talking about it all the time in the fire station, around superiors. It doesn't matter. Everybody's talking about it now, and I think it's only going to get better. But it was just so cool to sort of see that, because that's sort of exactly what I want the effect of this to be, is that I want people engaged. I just want and people to stay engaged. So I think you're bang on. I think that's excellent. One thing I want to touch on, because I think you said you have experience in both areas: public mental health system versus the private mental health system. I mean, there is the public mental health system that anybody can take the opportunity to use if they need it. Do you find, I've heard some stories, some not too good stories about people trying to go through the public mental health system, but I mean, do you find that there's more and more the practitioners in public mental health are arming themselves as far as getting education on PTSD, because it is kind of a specialty, versus other things?
Yeah, to my knowledge, in our region, that has happened. That a number of clinicians have gone to get specialized training in treating PTSD because of its prevalence out there. Now, one thing to say, though, a lot of sometimes many of us have to go to public mental health, and when I say have to, it's because we can't afford private services.
Absolutely.
And we don't have coverage, and so the other thing is that public mental health is free to all Canadians, so everyone can access it, and that it's a social service that we all rely on. So it's the private system that's often covered by insurance companies like Blue Cross and others and some of the federal first responders like RCMP. Those people have health services. DND people have health services integral to their system, and that will cover the cost of therapy and services. So that's. Private psychology is very costly, and most ordinary people couldn't afford it without the support of an insurance company.
Absolutely, and obviously, there's numerous private practitioners that you can seek out, I would imagine. And
not too numerous, though, and that depends where you live. And so again, when we're looking at Nova Scotia, where there's a lot of rural, sometimes it means that people have to travel a fair bit to find a clinician who would have the relevant training.
But and so it must be important then when you do. If I was somebody who was seeking out somebody new and meeting them for the first time, is to really be clear and would you just come out and ask them do you have experience with PTSD, or are you well read on the subject, or are you prepared, or educated to that level, or.
And I can talk a little bit more too about the two primary kinds of therapy that are done for PTSD, and people can ask those clinicians, whether public or private, whether they have a background in either of those techniques. And many would have something, and but if some people have gone for more quite in-depth training in these things, and so you can find that out from talking to whoever you've gone to see.
Excellent. Yeah, and I do want to get in another episode. I want to really get into get the teeth into those different kinds of therapies and explain it for our listeners for sure.
Okay.
So that they're well educated on it. So one thing I think a good issue or subject to sort of bring this conversation back around and give everybody a good foundation is, you mentioned that PTSD is not a life sentence. You don't feel it's a lifelong chronic illness that you have to deal with for the rest of your life. And I just want you to maybe just to talk about that a little bit.
What I really want to emphasize is that even complex PTSD, which by complex we mean someone who, say, had childhood abuse and is a firefighter and just saw a baby die and, all very, very, very horrible complex situations with multiple traumas, even that can be cured. It can be resolved. It can be treated to the point where the person doesn't have those symptoms anymore. And and other types of trauma, rape trauma caused by being, cancer patients are another group that often have post-traumatic stress disorder. There's a number of terrible things people can go through in life that they can recover completely from the traumatic effects of with appropriate therapy. So I guess what I want to say is you have to see. Sometimes people don't believe me when I say that.
Right.
You have to see it to believe it, or you have to be that person to believe it. You have to undergo it and go, oh my God, I feel completely better now. It's sort of like the difference between when you have a horrible, horrible toothache, it feels horrible all the time, and then when you get it repaired, you probe it with your tongue to say, that tooth used to hurt, but now it doesn't. It just feels fine. It feels normal. That's what some patients have said to me. He said, I can probe this. I put my finger right on it. I can think, Swiss air, Swiss air, Swiss air. And I said, it just doesn't make me react the way it doesn't make me react the way it used to. It doesn't make me react at all.
I think, I think that's opposite of what a lot of people think, is that you're broken and you may be able to mitigate or, duct tape yourself back together, but you don't ever get back to the person that you were. I think a lot of people think that. When I say that people can recover, they can recover completely. Some people don't recover completely because of other things that are going on in their lives, or other challenges they're facing with their health or their marriage or whatever. There are a number of other factors besides the traumatic event that is influencing people in life. So as those are limiting factors on how well someone can get. But on the whole, I just want to make it clear that people don't have to live with nightmares, flashbacks, dread, fear. It just doesn't have to be that way, and that people can recover things they thought were lost forever. So one example that I like to tell is a story of a first responder that who'd responded to the Swiss Air disaster and had been intimately involved in that. It was so traumatized, couldn't even drive past the airport initially. But then, not long after that, once with effective treatment, this person was flying off to Regina, flying off to Rio de Janeiro. Wow.
So people
awesome.
They're flying around the world traveler now on airplanes, no problem, reads the paper, reads about airline disasters, can turn the page, sleeps fine at night, it's not an issue. And so people can get there. Wow,
that's excellent. I think, and you know what, that's probably a great example and story to end this month's conversation on, I think. But, I'm just excited. We're going to talk about so many different things and so many different topics.
We are.
And I'm hoping that, obviously that listeners will start telling us what they want to hear about and start giving us suggestions about what they might like you to talk about, or, a guest they may want me to go and try to get on. That's really what I hope drives this thing in the future is the listeners engaging and writing in and asking us questions, and that's what's going to be really exciting, I think, when that starts to happen. All right, well, Robin, I want to thank you very much. I think this is the start of something, hopefully something special and exciting, and again, can't thank you enough.
I'm delighted to have the opportunity.
Awesome, and so until next month, we'll have another chat. And again, just thanks, and we'll talk to you next month.
Very good.
All right. Thank you.
Well, guys, there you have it. The first episode of UpTalk. I hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed putting it together. And I would ask that you share this with whoever you can. Help me get it out there. Help get as big of an audience as we can, to get as large a community as we can. I want as much input as possible. I want everybody engaged in this and giving their input. That would be fantastic. Next month should be really interesting. If all goes as planned, I'll have the Minister of Health for Nova Scotia, Leo Glavine, as my special guest. And we'll be talking about legislation and what's going on with the Workers' Compensation Board and other provinces in the country, how we can maybe shift our Workers' Compensation Act to better protect first responders with PTSD, as well as other general governmental questions and healthcare questions surrounding protecting first responders. If you guys have any questions in particular that you want me to ask Mr. Glavine, as long as it has something to do with PTSD and first responders, please feel free again to email me at uptalkpodcast@gmail.com. Facebook message me on the UpTalk Podcast Facebook page. Tweet me at UpTalk Podcast. get a hold of me. There's many ways to do it, so please do. And until next month, please take care of one another. Please continue the conversation. And I'll chat again next month.
'Cause we ain't superheroes, we're just ordinary people trying to make a difference, and the first on every scene. And it's a